Welcome to the seventh day of this three-day marathon. I don't know about you, it's been kind of hectic and a bit overwhelming in all directions. It's always a very exciting time, and there's always so much that's happening around. But coming towards this second afternoon, I'd just say that the subject matter, which is formally accelerating scaled innovation in learning and employment technology in the employment and technology sector, is particularly relevant. And we all face huge challenges, and that we're dealing with in many different ways, in helping the ed sector come to terms with a very new world. And, you know, I wanted to kick off with an unusual statistic, sort of the obverse of what people expect. But McKinsey did a study of the workforce, which was published in January, which said that precisely 5% of the jobs out there were candidates for full automation. What was interesting, however, was the other statistic, which wasn't said, was that almost every job has the potential for some automation. And that, by the way, includes CEO slots. And they said that an estimated quarter of CEO jobs could be automated. I am looking forward to that day. But with that kind of in mind, we've got to just think about the role of technology and changing work patterns in our workspace. And what does that mean? Because for all of us, it's meant that the key skill that we're actually transmitting is the skill of how to learn rather than necessarily what to learn. And it's evident that in a workforce which will look very different tomorrow than today's, it's going to pose a lot of very deep questions for our education system. And that means that when we look at a young student like this young woman, we're faced with the question of what on earth do we do to make sure that she gets her best shot at fulfilling her full potential? And how do we even begin to measure that? And I'd like to have, in this conversation with you all, I'd like to focus on what I kind of consider the three core responsibilities that the edtech sector, that we in the edtech sector have and need to be mindful of in order to support that process and in order to make sure that students are emerging college and career ready and that people can really fulfill all that they can be. But I think the first thing is just to sort of sit back and be a little bit humble about the role of technology in this, because learning is a tremendously social endeavor, and the point of interface between where people are and where technology is crucial. This is absolutely not about robot teachers in the sky. It's about something very different. And what we need to do is then reflect on where AIs and where technology can support people in the transmission of education. We're very involved in a program down in Georgia Tech, CS 1301, a development introduction to computer science course. And the TA who's just won the TA of the Year award is a TA called Jill Watson. She was very, very promising. She was very quick to respond to people. And indeed, two of the students did indeed proposition her. But she was a piece of AI. She was a piece of AI masquerading as a person. She was very human in her interaction. And what prompted student response was the fact that they felt somebody was listening, somebody was responding in a timely fashion, somebody was dealing with them in a proper and quick way. So too much of what we do with the ed tech hat on starts with the tech and downplays the ed. And I think that's the first sort of view that I'd have. So we've got to focus on people and their needs, and those are pretty fundamental. And some of the presentations that I've seen even here still seem to ignore the key social aspect of learning and of teaching. So while we harness technology to support teaching and learning, while we harness technology to enable scale, while we harness technology to measure and instrument progress, we've got to really remember that this is more than anything about people, and sometimes we forget it. And that's why in McGraw-Hill we've got this tagline specifically combining the science of learning with the art of teaching, because they are complementary and they need to be here together. So with that kind of as a preamble, there are three things that I really wanted to bring out. How do we combine technology and pedagogy to equip teachers and indeed the educational systems that support them and the instructors in higher ed to help students improve their basic math. That is unequivocally the single greatest thing we could do. Math is where college dreams go to die, and it is the one area where we know we can make a massive and immediate difference and really be transformative in that. With that, we need to then think about a second objective, which is how do we make sure that more of the students who are entering college are prepared for college-level work on day one, and how do we develop the strategies for retaining them and helping them to graduate? That's the second thing we need to do as EdTech in order to support the wider mission that we're trying to be a part of. And third, we need to build digital systems that actually talk to one another and that are designed to make lives easier and not more complex, that are designed to facilitate development of programs and systems as opposed to create system lock-in and structure and prevent change. We want interoperability that allows that. And these are the three themes that I'm going to talk about today. Math, how do we make sure that people are prepared for college work? And third, interoperability. Let's start on math. It's a pretty dismal story. You know, if we think about the PISA ranking, 2012 was not a high point. To be 28th in the world didn't feel great. Being right down there, 10 places below, there's a math point for you. I was looking for a joke. Anyway, 7 points down is an indictment, and it's something that we actually know we can do something about. So that's across the 60 nations who participate in the PISA system. And that's not consistent with the ambitions that the country has got and for growth, for development, and for personal fulfillment. And for the millions of students who have ambitions to graduate from college, that maths score is the most formidable barrier. It's the place where, when we see of those who enter two-year schools, the failure point is the most acute. About half of those entering two-year schools require remediation, which is a pretty dismal indictment of the process which has put them there, because they all graduated high school. And for students entering four-year institutions, the proportion is smaller. Only 20% require remediation, which is hardly a stunning indictment or a stunning endorsement of the way the system's working. So recently, the non-profit organization Achieve conducted a national survey which found that 83% of high school graduates whose highest level of math was below Algebra 2 needed remedial math when they got to college. But the remedial classes, when they are designed, are all too often a part of the problem, that once people get caught in remediation, it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. So an incredible 80% of students who go into remediation, it's like going into a kind of dishwasher, which they never come out of. And they all fail. So that's where I think we in the EdTech sector can play a really important role. And ultimately, the technologies that we support, the AIs that we develop, the systems and interfaces that we build are really the most promising path forward, particularly when it comes to building that bridge that exists or that should exist between the skills that high schools require for graduation and the skills that colleges expect on arrival. And there's lots of things that we can do there. And I want to go through a couple of examples. And let's start, as we're in Salt Lake with Arizona State University, where, ASU, we're really proud. Today is just launching the second of our AI math programs, ALEX, inside the Global Freshman Academy. It's a pre-calculus course. It complements the algebra that's already out there. But they had the challenge of dealing with an environment of saying, how do we break the math barrier for entry to college? And they came about the idea of putting together a system which would encourage people to participate in college-level math for free, at distance, and on the basis of successful completion, then have a full credit and be able to enter the system without the failure point being in front of them, but being on the other side of the hurdle. The experiment has been a resounding success. It's been absolutely extraordinary. And in the sections which are completing, 9 out of 10 students who are going through it are achieving the mastery levels required to allow them to complete the college algebra requirements. We think that's fantastic. We also sort of note that it's a question of how we engage with the learning experience. So while we're very proud of and very excited by the progress that ASU is making with Alex, which really tells us that we can develop AIs that deliver at scale with very low levels of support, we've then got to think about the teaching and the pedagogy which accompanies the wider rollout of online systems. Because going online by itself, while it provides a forum which is naturally lends itself to scale, the question is, how does it relate to the teaching? And that brings us very squarely back to work which was published by Benjamin Bloom in the mid-80s, a series of articles, but ending with this fabulous piece, the 2 sigma problem. And for those of you who have not seen it before, I'm going to spend a second setting it up because it's so important. And it is the foundation of everything that we look at in our interaction with the world of ed tech. Bloom's research took 3 cohorts of different ways, or took students through 3 different structured ways of teaching. The first was a conventional sage on a stage model, subject to the classic curve, and that's the red curve that we all are very familiar with, that most of us were passed and failed with. In fact, most people in this room were on the right-hand side of this distribution. And the pretty shocking thing is, I bet you, if you could have asked those who taught you at university, that 95% of you would have been spotted in the first 3 or 4 weeks as likely to be in the top half of that class, because that's what the system does. Bloom looked at it and said, well, let's try a different way. Let's keep the sage on a stage, but supplement it with mastery-based approach, which required that before you do the second step, you've mastered the first step. Before you do the third, you demonstrate mastery of the first and the second. So there's nobody being left behind. Time is taken out of the equation. It's not how long you sat in class. It's do you know is the gateway from step 1 to step 2. And what was fascinating is with the same distribution of abilities in a cohort of students, the average grade improved by 1 full grade. So that's from a C to a B. That's his first sigma improvement. And the second striking thing about that piece of insight was that the student who was at the bottom left-hand end of that red distribution, the worst student identified by the grading system, could be almost randomly distributed on that blue curve, which is a pretty scary thing to realize because it actually says that we're failing a lot of people who could be achieving mastery. Bloom went a bit further and then said, well, what if I gave the benefit of one-to-one tuition to the same cohort of students? What would happen again? And lo and behold, he got another full sigma improvement in performance. That is, all those C's which had converted to a B now converted from a B to an A. All the D's went to a C, and now they went from a C to a B. And again, there was this shuffling of the deck. Not quite as acute, but there was a shuffling of the deck of where you fell in the first curve, where you fell in the second curve. We looked at this and said, you know, it is a wonderful dream to offer tutorial on a one-to-one basis to everybody. But what would happen if we could replicate in software the gates and standards that are intrinsic to mastery-based learning, and at the same time, the prompts and cues that support tutorial? And that's what we think is the power of AI, is to harness those insights and allow at scale the deployment of structures which fundamentally support the student to learn as fast as they can, which take off the instructor or the teacher the burden of what I'd call the donkey work of the learning, but support them by allowing them to intervene with a given student at the moment where the intervention is most acute and most relevant. So technology can do a huge amount for us around that. And here in Utah, we've got a number of schools who are using Alex very, very successfully, one of our adaptive learning programs. And they're using it in high school. About 20% of high school students are using it on math. And what we're seeing out of that is a consistent rate of improvement of mastery-based achievement of basic math, and then supporting that, teachers and faculty being empowered to come in and intervene at the right moment to communicate what they're best at, which is insight, understanding, that spark of learning, which is what we should be getting out of our teachers. It's extraordinary for me to sort of stand up here and realize that, and then at the same time to reflect that nationally, only about 4% of general and dev ed courses, all of which would benefit from this, use it. 96% are taught in the traditional form. And if I think about that, the implications for what it means for whole cohorts of students who are being failed are very profound. And I'd encourage any of you who are particularly moved by that to look at a wonderful TEDx talk by a guy called David Lordy, which looked at how many students he graduated from his Introduction to Chemistry course in UT Austin, where he's built over time a tremendous facility of using the data to deploy, to support mastery learning and effective one-to-one tuition. And on the back of that has massively changed the number of students who get an A, and crucially, no longer can spot the students who are going to win within the first week of class, because talent is revealed through the process and not spotted at the beginning. But there's an opportunity to do better in lots of ways. And this is a picture of myself and a young lady called Martha Ben. I will spare you what's on her hat, but she is as feisty as the day is long, and very, very secure, and also a very atypical student, according to some people. And here she is at the Austin Community College, studying for her math qualification to support her third career in real estate, because she's got to get her math certification in order to get her real estate certificate. And a non-traditional student in a non-traditional environment, reflective of our new world. And we all too often forget that the age and demographics of the students coming back to community college is very different. It's not 18-year-olds coming in for a 3-year spell. It could be people typically in their 20s and 30s and now 40s and 50s, and in her case in her 70s, coming and seeking the opportunity to progress through harnessing technology. And that accelerator, which is housed in a JCPenney adjacent to the campus, the store went bust. They fitted it out for 600 workstations. You're allowed to drink in the environment. You're allowed to talk in the environment. The person who is the librarian of the Austin Community College is actually a former basketball coach, and it has a very social environment. Dramatic throughput, dramatic success. And again, it's a case where AI, being humanized, being delivered in a fantastic way, is supporting great instruction and supporting the development of learning. So when we think about those students and their needs, Martha Ben's story is much more typical, and it's much more inspiring than the progress that we normally see with classic college students, well prepared, going through the system. This is the deployment of technology to make a massive difference in society, to really help people in a very great way. Her pattern of work is not dictated by the pace of a class. It's dictated by how quickly she masters the content. Her success is not gated by how many talented students there are in the class. The objective is everybody can get to mastery. The objective now for our education system is surely to produce people who are capable and able and willing to fulfill the tasks and fulfill their potential, rather than just wave a piece of paper saying, I got an A. ACC, Austin's community college, has seen a really impressive improvement in their developmental math program through the use of the accelerator. And of the students who've completed the developmental math course in one semester, 77% went on to pass college algebra the following semester, with half of those earning that very, very targeted A. That is a remarkable compared to the 48% pass rate for college algebra across the college as a whole. So come into developmental math, you're destined to fail. Get through this amazing program, which actually makes certain you don't. And you go out, and you're likely to come out with successful entry to college and persistence, which is going to take you through the system. So new models for growth, like I saw at the Austin Accelerator, can unleash the power of adaptive technology and help more and more students overcome barriers like those of remedial math. And that brings me to the third subject, the hourly wage gap, our third responsibility. College remains, for those who graduate, far and away the best investment any of us, any student can make. The real challenge, of course, is not the ones who are successful in graduating, but the ones who are unsuccessful, who pay partial fees for partial completion. And 59% of all those who enter four-year schools complete, just under 30% of those who enter two-year schools complete. So solving the math problem is fundamental to solving the persistence and graduation problem, which is the way to address student debt. It's also, by the way, to ensure that college funding is secure, because getting students to enroll one extra semester changes the economics of all the colleges. So what we try to look at then is, what are the other obstacles? And I want to pick up one crucial area of interoperability. EdTech is very proud of what it does, and it's kind of funny having come into the EdTech world from the rest of the tech world, which is totally standards-based, to see the complete failure of the EdTech world to embrace standards. And while these issues of interoperability seem rather dry and arcane, particularly to non-technologists, it's actually fundamental for us to allow interoperability between different programs, to allow teachers and instructors to have the confidence to move from system to system. To use that USB port to plug from one thing into another allows us to be secure that one device is going to work with the next. All of us in the world of education have gone into lots of classrooms where we've seen that isolated, lonely, expensive bit of kit at the back, which has been superseded, but costs a ton of money. Interoperability is the way for us to promote innovation. It's the way for us to promote ease and facility in training, because we're not endlessly retraining. And so what we then see is, around this, a tremendous way for us to make a difference. And I'd encourage all of you in the EdTech world to say we really, really need to think very hard. If we want to create this vision for interoperability, we need to really make the big effort and make certain that we endorse on a consistent basis IMS Global. If you're in the procurement side, if you're in a school, a district, or a college, you need to be writing that into your procurement requirements, that vendors have to deliver to this. And on the back of that, need to make certain that we all then can promote an environment which optimizes choice, which optimizes innovation, and that would be a great way forward. So on that, with this little speed talk, I see my clock is now down, and Vanessa's not going to yank me off stage. I'd love to open up if there are any questions. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Is there a similar transformation?
Yeah, the reason we can talk so easily and so readily about Alex is, of course, because it's been in the market for so long, all the third-party stuff is fantastic, and so it's just ready for prime time. We've got 3 million students on Connect across subjects from anthropology through to zoology. We see a consistent, absolutely the same patterns of development going through, this mastery-based learning leading to results. But because we don't have the long duration, we don't have peer studies, we've got a lot of faculty who stick with it. So yes, and then the other point there is we've made the data out of the Connect and Learn Smart and Smart Books available. We've created a thing called the Learning Council to allow access for third-party researchers. And what we've got going right now is some research with many, many institutions, but among them Colorado State, who is using some of the patterns of interaction with the Connect homework tool as a predictor of failure and to preempt, and to allow faculty to intervene, faculty and administration to intervene. And that's a really exciting piece of research which is underway. But yes, mastery tutorial coming through that as well.
So just to follow up on the question of standards, within your portfolio you have these two different silos. Yeah. Are you migrating in one direction or the other? What's your standard strategy?
So we're migrating over time. The best piece of AI we've got is ALEX. It was originally designed with math. It's been extended to chemistry. We've now put the ALEX algorithm into our first wave of mobile products. And those are on a platform which we call StudyWise, but it's effectively the ALEX algorithm underneath, which is driving some things in medicine, in chemistry, or medicine, business, and Spanish, I think, are the first three subjects. over time, we think that'll be there. And we shouldn't need competition between the AIs over time. It'll be a consistent platform basis. Through at the back.
Yeah, question about the interoperability. Why do you think it's taken so long for education companies and ed tech companies to sort of embrace IMS standards to the degree that we want them to?
Right.
And how do you envision sort of reinvigorating
Right. Well,
that effort?
Two reasons. I think traditionally publishers saw the world as a walled garden, so they didn't need to interoperate, so why go there? That's the historic. So the big legacy companies came from that orientation, and we've just changed. We've gone through a 180. And secondly, small ed tech startups were not necessarily all familiar with IMS Global, and they've had to, we're having to discover it, but because it's not required in procurement, some of them think they don't build to it. So that's what's gone on there. I'm being given the signal. I'd ask all of you who have the opportunity to come and join us at 5:15 outside. We're actually awarding 2 amazing educators who are here and a third one remotely, the McGraw Prize in Education, and we're really proud to do it. We've got 3 very, very fantastic winners, all taking place over drinks in the courtyard at 5:15 today. Thank you very much for being here.